Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
Later in the pod, a conversation I had on Friday with Cal Cunningham, who's running against Tom Tillis for the North Carolina Senate seat that could give the Democrats the majority and cost Mitch McConnell his job as majority leader.
I like him. I like the cut of his jib.
Excited. He's great. And
Charming.
I don't have this in the outline, but also news today, Steve Bullock is officially in. So Montana also in play now.
Let's go.
Hey, real quick, though, shout out Chuck Schumer, who clearly made a lot of these recruits get in the game.
Chuck got his men and women.
We got to give Chuck some credit where credit is due.
But first, before that, we're going to talk about the Trump administration's frighteningly incompetent response to the rapidly spreading coronavirus. Let's start with the latest on the coronavirus outbreak. The global pandemic has now affected more than 100,000 people and killed 3,800. Here in the U.S., we're now over 500 confirmed cases across 33 states, with 20 Americans who've died. In northern Italy, the hardest hit place outside of China, the government has instituted a lockdown, which the leading U.S. official for infectious diseases said might have to happen in certain communities here. Probably less of a lockdown, but some social distancing. Dr. Anthony Fauci also recommended that the elderly and those with underlying health conditions avoid travel and large public gatherings. Meanwhile, global stock markets are collapsing over the economic impact of coronavirus, as well as an oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Trading was halted on Wall Street this morning after the market plunged 1,800 points at the opening bell. I think right now we're around down 2,000 as we record this. And how is our president handling the crisis? Well, yesterday he was golfing after holding a press conference at the CDC on Friday where he said this.
But anybody that needs a test can have a test. They're all set. They have them out there. In addition to that, they're making millions of more as we speak. But as of right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test, that's the important thing. And the tests are all perfect. Like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? This was not as perfect as that, but pretty good. I have great experts, including our vice president, who's working 24 hours a day on this stuff. They would like to have the people come off. I'd rather have the people stay, but I'd go with them. I told them to make the final decision. I would rather, because I like the numbers being where they are. I don't need to have the numbers double because of one ship. That wasn't our fault.
Guys, initial reactions?
I think it was a mistake to have Donald Trump be president during this crisis.
There's so much back patting. There's so much congratulating for working hard. Yeah, there's a global pandemic. It's kind of priced in. You should, go to the office. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, look, the strange word association that, obviously tests weren't available. That was a lie.
They still aren't for anyone who wants them.
Right. I mean, they are shipping, a lot of tests now,
Yep.
but there was a huge delay caused by the Trump administration's incompetence. The fact that his brain makes the word perfect come out to describe his conduct, and then he immediately goes to his perfect call, the perfect, as we all know, the classic phrase, it was as perfect as my call with Ukraine, which is in a sense true. They're both, historic blunders and a sign of deep inherent narcissism and corruption. It's a dystopian image, all of these people around Donald Trump praising him to the high heavens in the hopes that he might let them say something true.
It's a small point, too, but he's wearing a Make America Great Again hat during his CDC headquarters briefing, which is just probably illegal under the Hatch Act. It's incredibly inappropriate. And, come on, man. But, I mean, there's a couple of buckets of screw-ups here. There are things that his technocratic, scientific health leadership team did that were mistakes that set us back weeks. And then there's clearly a series of decisions that flowed from Trump's desire to downplay this pandemic that had a cascading effect that has left us in a terrible, terrible position to deal with this virus. And, what has been also obvious at all these press events is he cares more about the economic impact because that has clear political consequences for him. So you have to imagine that the White House is panicking right now, watching the markets down 7% today, when on Friday, Larry Kudlow, his straight from CNBC Green Room economic advisor, said, hey, now's a good time to buy the dip in the stock market prices because we have this thing contained.
Yeah, I think Trump saying that he didn't want the Americans brought ashore from the cruise ship because he doesn't want the numbers to go up because he likes the numbers down. I think that is indicative of how he has fucked up the entire response to this crisis, which is he only views it through the prism of his own political standing and how it's going to look. And so therefore he continues to downplay the severity of the crisis because he's worried what Tommy said about the economic implications, but also if it looks like more Americans have the virus, that looks bad because Trump told us, of course, a couple weeks ago that there were only 15 cases and it would be down to 0 soon. Larry Kudlow also said that it was being contained. Kellyanne Conway said it was being contained. The administration's telling people it's being contained. That isn't true. I mean, there's a couple of things he's done here, right? Like there was a number of really great TikToks of how the administration has mishandled this over the last couple of weeks in Politico. Dan Diamond wrote one there, and then in the Washington Post and the New York Times. Basically, the story is like he yelled at experts who told him bad news. He doesn't want bad news, and so the staff is now, the administration officials, the non-political administration officials are afraid to tell him bad news. They're conditioned, right, because he doesn't want it. They said the test would be ready. They weren't. They were slow on the testing. They could have eliminated regulations that would have allowed private companies to do testing weeks and weeks ago. They just did it late last week, so they were late there. And basically, if he had talked about the severity of the crisis earlier, hospitals, other healthcare facilities could have been prepared. They could have started buying more respirators, getting more hospital beds, more staffing. They could have been prepared earlier than they have been.
Yeah. I mean, look, also, personnel is policy, right? And so from the very beginning of this, technocratic leadership at places like CDC have been muzzled because they've been speaking hard truths. And then on top of that, the Presidential Personnel Office is being filled with Trump fans, right? He just brought back his body guy who had been fired for some reason. He's now in charge. There's a report in Politico that the latest Presidential Personnel Office hire is a 23-year-old college senior. That's how unserious they are about staffing the government with people who know what they're doing.
Right. They were apparently Trump aides were mocking Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary, for being alarmist about this. Yeah. Mocking him because they're a bunch of children.
Well, yeah, I mean, Trump has been furious at some of the career officials, actual medical experts for telling the truth before getting ahead of the administration and being honest, right? I mean, it's not just that when these people were saying it was contained, it was rosy, it was unknowable and not true. And it's because they were worried, they're not just thinking politically. They're not only thinking about PR, they're thinking about PR in an incredibly narrow and foolish and short-sighted way.
Right. Even if you said, okay, they just want to think about the political implications and the public opinion, all that stuff, they're still doing it wrong.
They're still doing it wrong. I mean, let's say Donald Trump was just, all I care about is winning. What do I need to do to win? A smart political person would say, you need to be honest now to create the conditions for you to demonstrate that you're doing a good job managing this over the long term, because the coronavirus doesn't watch Lou Dobbs and doesn't respect Republican talking points. So if you don't get ahead of this now, everything you're doing to be rosy will make you look that much dumber in a week's time.
It's what you said last pod, which is it's short-termism, right?
Yes.
It's like, I just got to get through today and tomorrow and win this news cycle, and then I don't have to worry about what's happening down the road. So there was an AP report. A government official told the Associated Press that the White House overruled health officials who wanted to recommend that elderly and physically fragile Americans be advised not to fly. So this story comes out. And of course, Fauci on Meet the Press on Sunday basically gave that recommendation anyway. So the recommendation came out, but now they look like they covered it up because they did cover it up.
Yeah, containment buys you time. You can stop flights to China and maybe get yourself a couple weeks before the outbreak grows, but any public health expert could have told you for months now that this was inevitable, that there was going to be a massive global spread of this disease. And so on top of what you guys were mentioning, I mean, when Congress first started talking about some sort of a package of funds to deal with this crisis, Trump literally made fun of Chuck Schumer at a press conference for proposing $8 billion when what he wanted was basically $2.5 billion, half of it stolen from other programs. So from the very beginning, they've minimized this in very real ways that have had a cascading effect, and now here we are.
And to tell you how bad that is, they passed the $8 billion. Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, found out that New York was only getting $35 million of the $8 billion, and now he's pissed at even the bigger package that Democrats in Congress agreed to, because New York now has a crisis on their hands and they don't have enough money to handle it.
And by the way, the pittance that this debate will seem Let me say again. And by the way, the debate about $2 billion versus $8 billion is going to seem like nothing when, due to the mismanagement of the Trump administration, we start talking about a massive stimulus to help the economy when people can't go to work, when kids can't go to school and parents have to stay home, when people have to cancel their shifts because they can't do food service work and they don't have any money to get them through the periods of time when they can't go to work, or they're desperately trying to figure out if they can work when they're sick. All of the
Never mind all the associated healthcare costs.
All the associated healthcare costs.
Literally trillions and trillions of dollars in value of the stock market have just been wiped out.
And look, we don't know how bad this is going to be, but in that same press conference where Trump made fun of Chuck Schumer for wanting the money, Azar, after getting down on his knees and kissing Trump's feet and telling the dear leader how marvelous he was doing, said, thanks to President Trump, his actions have bought us time. Because even then, they knew that what was coming was going to be really serious. And why is buying time so important? Well, we don't know how big the peak of this is going to be. But if you can spread it out over time, maybe our healthcare system can have the capacity to deal with it. And because we have no idea how far this has spread, because there was so little testing, we do not know just how bad a position the administration has put us in, and that people who are sick may not be able to get the care they need in the emergency that may be coming.
Hey, Lovett, you practiced social distancing in high school. Can you describe that to listeners? What was that? Yeah,
well, basically what happens is a really cool girl waves at you, and you wave back, and she says, "I'm waving at someone behind you." And then repeat that every day for years.
Some social distancing can be spent in a locker or
a recycling bin.
Or a recycling bin.
Or playing Mario 64 during your prom.
Listen, nothing wrong with that.
Oh my God, the face Jordan just made.
I love Mario 64.
So there's another danger here, which is that because Trump is downplaying the crisis, his propaganda outlets are doing the same thing. Laura Ingraham said Democrats are using the pandemic to smear the administration. Sean Hannity said the left is rooting for the coronavirus. And Medal of Freedom winner Rush Limbaugh said the coronavirus is just like the common cold. Also, both CNN and MSNBC have run clips of Trump supporters outside a Trump rally saying that coronavirus is, quote, a hoax made up by the Democrats. Now, this is, in the age of Trump, I think this is something relatively new, that we may now have a, global pandemic and this crisis where, a whole segment of the American population who gets their news and information from propaganda outlets just doesn't take the proper steps and precautions because they don't believe it to be true.
I mean, we've been shitting on, not we, the Trump administration has been shitting on globalism for a long time. And there's a healthy dose of anti-Semitism in there. There's a bunch of nationalist, MAGA bullshit. But it's quite frustrating when you think about these challenges because it is a global world. And Republicans are willing to talk about targeting terrorist groups overseas so that they don't come here, right? We need to apply that kind of approach to the logic when you're talking about global climate change or disease mitigation like this. But for some reason, it just gets demagogued and dismissed. And then on top of that, we have these insane conspiracy theories that are not inconsequential, right? QAnon went from a thing that people scoffed at and mocked to omnipresent at Trump rallies. And it's a deeply scary theory when you really dig into the details. So I suspect that these conspiracy theories are going to grow and get worse.
It's also, again, the coronavirus doesn't listen to Rush Limbaugh, and Rush Limbaugh's audience, Laura Ingraham's audience, Sean Hannity's audience. These are older people. Right. These are people whose immune systems are not receptive to these arguments. And, Scott Gottlieb, who's a former FDA commissioner, I believe, gave a pretty chilling interview on one of the Sunday shows.
By the way, former FDA commissioner under the first 2 years of Trump.
Yeah. And he said, basically, this is not the flu. This is far more serious than the flu. And the inability of experts to overcome what the right-wing media is trying to do inside the administration, outside of the administration, is a genuinely dangerous and new aspect of how this is going to just make life worse for everybody.
I mean, a few examples. Matt Gaetz mocked coronavirus by wearing like this big gas mask the other day. Mm-hmm. And, one of the first people who died in Florida was in his district. CPAC, Conservative Political Action Committee, had their conference. And one of the attendees at CPAC has now tested positive for coronavirus. And Ted Cruz was there and had contact with the man, and he's now self-quarantined. for this week.
Paul Gosar, member of Congress,
Yep.
a couple days ago tweeted, for a moment I thought Donald Trump created this virus in a secret lab in Wuhan. At least that's how the Democrats, hysterical Dems, make it sound. Remember when Obama brought in Ebola patients? Good times. Now he is self-quarantined.
Yeah. So
Maybe we could take our job seriously,
right.
Republican member
Right.
of
Like
Congress.
no one needs to panic, and we should just like listen to experts, but we should like when the experts speak, don't call it a fucking hoax. And we should talk about how the non-Trump media is covering this too. Last week, Trump told this complete lie that the testing delay was Obama's fault. And the New York Times headline was, quote, criticized for coronavirus response, Trump points to Obama administration. You have to get to the third paragraph, and even then it just says, quote, it was not entirely clear what he was referring to. How should the media cover a president who's just lying to the public during a global pandemic?
I don't think that's the right way. When Donald Trump is flailing and making things up on the fly, you don't have to pretend that you just couldn't put enough researchers on the case to get what he was referring to. And, that the author of that story, one of the authors of that story, Peter Baker, famously talks about how hard he works not to form his own opinions, to not even discuss political matters when he is in private, to not vote. And Peter, if your mind is so open that your brain falls out of your head and into the fucking sewer, maybe there's just some utility to being a little bit critical of what you're told, given that you're the paper of the record and one of the most important places people get information about an ongoing pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I just think on a normal day, just sort of uncritically repeating Trump's lies is shitty journalism. And you see it all the time, especially on social media feeds for news outlets. Like Trump says that Obama, killed an innocent person. It's something ridiculous and just gets repeated. And we need to fact check it in the first instance, because it doesn't matter if you have one story in the paper that's just the crazy attack on Obama from Trump, but then the lead all is a bigger analysis about the way he lies. In this social media driven world, the Trump campaign can take the story that blames Obama and put a couple $100,000 behind it on Facebook and boost it to all these people. So when Trump is spinning like dangerous health information, I think we have an extra obligation to fact check that on the front end, or not even report it. You don't have to repeat crazy lies. He says a lot of crap all day.
I realize it's important to cover what the president says, right? Of course you have to do that, but you don't have to cover every single word. You have to cover every single lie. Look, Trump's out there. This morning he was having like a complete breakdown on Twitter. He's tweeting how many times like this is fake news, everything's fine. Like of course it is the job of the press in a time like this, in the midst of a public health crisis, to call that out. Like if that's not their job, I don't know what is.
I'd also just say too, like, well, what's the biggest story right now about Donald Trump? Is it the precise attacks he launched today? There was one about Elizabeth Warren. There was one about Chuck Schumer. There was one about Barack Obama. There's one about the fake news. There's one about lies about the market. There's one about gas prices. There was all this morning. What's the most important thing about what Donald Trump did today? Is it the substance of what he's saying, or is it the fact of, in the midst of a crisis, we have someone desperately looking for ways to blame others? To me, that seems to be the most important thing. And to protect himself. That to me seems to be the most important thing. Not in a partisan way, not in an ideological way, just the fact of what we are going through, a global pandemic. The president is flailing and looking for someone to blame. Who he's blaming is such a second-order concern compared to having an incompetent commander-in-chief trying to treat this like a PR crisis.
Yeah, the most important stories over the weekend were those TikToks that the New York Times did an excellent one, and the Post and the Politico, about all these administration officials who are trying to do the right thing and are afraid, because Donald Trump is only concerned about his own political future, that he's not listening to them. That's the most important story to know.
I also, in one of the stories, I believe it was the Times, looking at the mismanagement and decision-making process over the last few days. By the way, in that story, mentions in passing that one of the key voices in making the decision as to whether or not to allow travel from China was Kellyanne Conway. Glad she's on the fucking case.
That's really, the pollster in there.
Yeah, really good to get her expert take. But also, it just included in passing that Trump's press conference at the CDC was rambling. And one of the hard parts, I think, about, and I don't begrudge the way in which reporters have to do this, is the need to just simply impose order on what Trump says sometimes hides just how lost and meandering his words have been in the past few days. And so, like, the imposing of a narrative on what Trump says, even that Peter Baker story talking about, Trump launching an attack against Obama, like his behavior has been erratic, hard to follow, misleading, lies, contradicting experts who are standing right next to him. And that, to me, is a big part of this, too. That's all.
Let's talk about what Democrats should be saying and doing here. We mentioned the $8.3 billion emergency spending bill that Congress passed, Trump signed. But then last night, Pelosi and Schumer put out a pretty strong statement hitting Trump for considering more corporate tax breaks instead of things like paid sick leave for people who are sick or quarantined, expanded unemployment insurance, protections for healthcare workers, free testing and care for people who have the virus, more money for hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. What else do you guys think? How do you think Democrats should be handling this?
If there is not a way for people who work hourly jobs to survive, to pay their rent, to put food on the table, to pay for childcare while they have this virus, they are going to go to work. And we have no hope of preventing the spread of this thing unless paid sick leave is on the table. So I feel like that has to be the thing that Democrats absolutely go to the mat to fight for, not just aid to U.S. energy producers, because there's a whole separate problem happening right now that we haven't talked about. Over the weekend, the Saudis and the Russians got into a massive oil price war where the Saudis basically said, fuck you to OPEC. We're going to cut prices. We're going to increase output. And what they're trying to do is so thoroughly collapse the price of oil that U.S. energy producers just can't function anymore, so they drive them out of business. So all the fracking and all the sort of ways that the U.S. has become energy independent recently go away. So that's happening in the background. And Trump's trying to tweet that that's good for the nation and that gas prices will go down. But in the long term, it's incredibly destabilizing. So what you're just seeing out right now is reporting that some of the latest ideas lead with aid to energy producers, support to small businesses, help the airline industry, which frankly will probably have to get bailed out because who the hell is going to fly right now? But we have to help hourly workers first and foremost.
Look, go ahead, Lovett.
No, that's it. I agree.
No, I think that no one should be rooting for a recession, and obviously no one should be causing panic that is unnecessary. But in every way that is warranted, Democrats should take this up to an 11 here, because you have a president who is massively mishandling a really serious public health crisis, and also a president who now we could be headed into a recession and has no idea how to handle anything, and is basically only thinking about everything through the lens of what's going to get me reelected in November. And he is sitting here talking about tax breaks for airline industry and for energy producers and all this other shit, when Democrats should be standing up for most of the workers and people in this country who could be hurt by this, both from a healthcare perspective and from an economic perspective. And I think Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders should both be talking about this nonstop. I think every candidate who's dropped out and is now a surrogate should be talking about this. I think every member of Congress should go on TV.
It's a competence argument. He is incompetent. These people are incapable of running the government.
Yeah, and that should be everyone's message over and over again.
He disbanded, because it was from Obama, the team that would have handled a pandemic inside the White House.
Yeah.
He, in the midst of a period of time where there was absolutely no economic justification for it, passed a massive tax cut for the biggest corporations and the wealthiest people in this country that created a $1 trillion hole. And now, at a moment where we really may be in a crisis, where we really may need the government to step in, they have already pulled a bunch of those levers, and now they're going to try to do it again to pay another corporate tax cut instead of paid leave, instead of just a help for people, tax rebate, what have you, but that their first instinct is to protect the airlines, protect the corporations instead of ordinary people, is despicable.
Democrats should dictate the demand, what's in the stimulus.
Yeah.
And they should, because there's probably going to be a bigger package debated, and Trump's going to try to just do the bare minimum for most people in this country and try to do whatever it takes to sort of calm the stock market. And Democrats should, it's good that Schumer and Pelosi got out ahead of this last night, and Democrats should be demanding all of those priorities in any kind of recovery stimulus, whatever you want to call it, package that comes, and not move on that.
Yeah, and just one thing Lovett said. So after the Ebola crisis in 2014, Ron Klain, who coordinated that response, told President Obama, hey, you probably shouldn't hire someone like me every time there's a pandemic, right? We should have a full-time person who works on this, who prepares, because a pandemic response is a global effort that requires the entire government and requires dealing with foreign governments, et cetera. So they created a person on the National Security Council and a team there that handled pandemic response. Trump got rid of them, right? On top of that, there's been budget after budget after budget of CDC cuts. So there's the near-term fuck-ups, and then there's this much more probably impactful long-term gutting of public health infrastructure, gutting of a program that was designed to identify diseases that jump from animals to humans that was set up during the Bush administration. They got rid of that. That one feels a little on the nose to me.
Yeah,
maybe a bad idea in hindsight.
Not to mention, by the way, desperately trying to throw people off their health care by trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act in the midst of a moment where what we need is for everyone to be able to access care.
Which, again, Democrats, are in a position to be talking about. This should be the whole story, and everyone should get on TV and be talking about it.
Absolutely.
And I think talking about it more than we're about to talk about sort of the differences between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, which, of course we have to talk about. We're in the middle of this primary, but I do think, if you're a Democrat out there, if you're on Twitter, you're going on TV, you should be talking about what is a massive public health and growing economic crisis in this country and Trump's mismanagement of it.
And it does go to a broader vision and difference between what Trump offers and Democrats offer. Put crisis aside, when people get sick and have to go to work, that is a problem all the time.
All the time.
It is a problem every flu season. It's a problem every cold season, and we just ignore it, and we can't.